It's the nation that has been making a lot of noise and a lot of headlines. Some say it's a hardline extreme state. Others say it's a beacon of independence and autonomy in an otherwise Western dominated Middle East. And my nose is already itching. Oh my God, unbelievable. The timing. Now, today, one take only. Today, I'm going to enjoy this cup of tea with you while we go through the recent history of this fortress nation state. Once seen as a friend, many don't know, of the United States and the Western world. Iran was once a friend, now seen very much, of course, as a foreign, hostile entity. Many are asking, yo, what's up with Iran? Like, what's the actual deal? People don't know. So grab a cup of tea or whatever, take a seat, and join me on this meandering, but hopefully not too long, not too lengthy history, of course, without the Western spin. That's what we're here for. Let's start right now and work backwards. That's a bit weird, but why not? I think, it's not how history works, but let's try it. Iran right now is a theocratic Islamic presidential republic. The head of state as is known as the Supreme Leader. Currently, that's the Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And he is the one with the highest authority in the land, and by and large, foreign policy and overarching state position and decision making must be green lighted from this figure. For example, if the country goes to war. Iran is a Shia Islamic republic, it should be mentioned, meaning the Shia branch of Islam is what is followed by the country's government and provided to the citizenry to follow. Though Sunni Muslims do live in the country, especially in the West, and practice according to their slightly different beliefs. Obviously, some Muslims will disagree on the slightly, but it's all subjective, remember. To the outside world, to non-Muslims, Sunni, Shia, the differences are quite minor. Now, below the supreme leader, there is a democratically elected president, actually, in Iran, and a whole parliament system. I've seen their parliament building, where they all sit. It actually looks quite dashing. It's quite well decorated. Kind of looks like the United Nations General Assembly, but it's just Allahu at the front, which is Allah, as a plaque instead of the UN symbol. Now, this is what the people vote for. The people of Iran vote for their parliament and their president. And they, the parliament and president, deal with the legislation, the civil oversight, the economic, non-military stuff, the day-to-day running of the country. Just make sure my mic's on. Now, currently, the president of Iran is Masoud Pezeshkian. Now, the current administration and the governance model overall only began about 50 years ago after the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Before then, Iran was a monarchy like Saudi Arabia or Qatar is today, right? They had a head of state that was a king, or because of Persian culture, a Shah, right? With the Shah being the head of state, not the Ayatollah at the time. Ayatollah, by the way, is just a title for a senior Shia religious figure of authority. So it's like, head of the religious body. Now, why was there a revolution in 1979? That's what many don't know. Well, because from 1953 onwards, the Shah of Iran, the king, you could say, Reza Pahlavi, or Pahlavi, sorry, kept the country very clearly within the Western sphere of influence. Right, from 1953 onwards, Iran was very much within the Western sphere of influence. And back then, 1953 to 1979, the world was bipolar, right? It was America versus the Soviet Union, the two great powers at the time, kind of like what we're shifting into now again, with America being the winner of the last one, and China this time being the new up and coming. So in this bipolar world, the Shah had made his choice, and he took Iran into the Western sphere. Along with his choice, though, technically Iran was already in the Western sphere. We'll get to that. But along with the choice the Shah made, he also had a desire to reform his country into a more prosperous, wealthy, modern state. His idea of making that a reality was, to a great extent, to westernize Iran. He thought, okay, to get richer, we need to follow those guys who are currently the richest And to follow them, we'll just follow them in everything, right? Westernize Iran. Women's rights were, for example, and women's rights will keep coming up, right? It is a very good indicator of where a government and officials in a country, Iran being no exception, which way they're sort of leaning. You look at the women's rights and the rules regarding women's dress. It is what it is. People care about their women folk, I suppose. So women's rights were seen as something that needed to be opened up. They didn't have enough rights. Islam was seen as something that should be separate from governance and political decision making under the Shah, as well as many economic reforms. He also had in mind land reforms, tech transfers from the West. These were all a package deal. Now, the goal of the Shah was to make Iran a rich and modern country under the subservience, really, under the tutelage at least, of the wise and generous guidance of the United States of America, the presiding world power at the time. Dissent, it should be noted, was not tolerated by the Shah. It got bad enough that citizens in Iran, especially among the more religiously inclined, of course, the more conservative, they felt that Islam was being all but erased from the state they lived in favor of Western backed secularism, a sort of worship of the West rather than a worship of the Creator under an Islamic system. And a combination of factors, a combination of unhappy individuals, unhappy groups of people, eventually led to the coordinated revolution in 1979, which succeeded in overthrowing the Shah, toppling the monarchy, basically, the kingship system, and forcing him to flee the country to America, probably. And then the Grand Ayatollah Khomeini, sorry, the Grand Ayatollah Khomeini took over. Khomeini, not the current Khamenei. Currently, it's Khamenei with an A. Before it was Khomeini with an O. Right? So from 1953, it's two different people. From 1953 to 1979, Iran was US aligned. That's what I'm trying to. This is what it boils down to. The government was US supported, and the SAVAK, the secret police essentially in Iran, was made sure that no dissent was permitted. They kept a tight grasp. Obviously, for better or worse, they didn't do a very good job because revolution, but they tried. Now, there was at the time a parliament, but it operated with way less power than before 1953. The Shah had most of the power. The US and the UK made sure of that the Shah had more power. So let's step back an age once more, backwards, to find out what the US and UK did to put Iran in this position where the Shah had a lot of power, their parliament, their president had almost none, right? Because this was US and UK backed. It was a coup. We'll get to that. A coup, a coup, coup. Sorry. So let's go pre 1953. Let's go back to about 1921. If you watched Harry Potter, imagine Tom Riddle's diary is open. We're going through the pages. And then it says 1921. And then we dive into the Tom Riddle's diary, I guess. I don't know. Okay, so this is a time when Iran's parliament had much stronger powers. 1921 onwards. They still had the Shah of Iran, but they also had a parliament that had teeth, right? The president, near the end of this 1921 to 1953 period, the president near the end, Mohammad Mossadegh, for example, made a historic decision for Iran. Iran, the state, and Iran, the people, would benefit from Iran's oil. That was his decision. They were not a colony or a puppet state for their natural resources to be spent to line the coffers, the wallets of far off Western imperial powers. So Mossadegh nationalized the Anglo Iranian Oil Company, British Petroleum, BP. Nationalized meaning taken into state ownership, not kept in private ownership, where a fat chunk, the majority by some reports, of the profits of the sale of the oil ended up in none other than Britain, where actually I am now. It's a bit ironic. The US and the UK were not pleased with Mossadegh's decision to nationalize the oil, so they engineered a coup. Operation Ajax and Operation Boot. Don't take my word for it. The CIA released classified documents, now declassified, back in 2013, making it clear that, yeah, we supported the coup because we were not happy with so much power being in the hands of the people and the parliament in Iran at the time. Lol. Champions of democracy only when it suits, remember. So by the end of the coup, supported by the US and the UK, by the end, the Shah of Iran had much more power, and the democratic component of Iran had much less. And the Shah was, of course, beholden to the West for giving him that extended power, and parliament was degraded, and Mossadegh, the democratically elected president, was kicked out of office. Good job to the champions of democracy, US and UK, for booting out to the president. Because why? Because he nationalized the oil and can't have now. We need the profits of there to be higher, right? No doubt the Shah gave big thanks to the US and the UK for getting rid of Mossadegh, who the Shah had to essentially share his power with before the coup. Now it was all his, or a lot more was his of the power. Now let's go back one more time and then we'll wrap up into a nice, tidy way of describing it so that you can explain to your friends, your mates, if you ever want, that, yeah, mate, I know the whole history of modern Iran without the Western spin. Let me tell you, you could be in a position to convey that. So let's go back one more time and then we'll wrap up or summarize. Pre 1921, Iran ruled relatively independent of outside forces, but it was so weak as a cohesive state that it had been carved up by more powerful regional players at the time into their own spheres of influence. Different parts of Iran for different, more established regional powers. Britain, the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian Empire. Russia was an empire at this time. Not a federation, not a USSR, not a Soviet state. That comes a bit after. Anyway, after 1921, the British installed the Shah through another coup to ensure Britain had a subservient or at least cooperative Iran to work with. So pre 1921, Iran was relatively independent, was ruled by the natives in some way or way, shape, or form. The British came in, they engineered a coup, established a Shah after 1921, a Shah that reported basically back to London, back to Britain. The years of the first Shah were known to be especially repressive, it should be said, especially to the traditional and more religious people in Iran. Women who wore headscarves faced intimidation, for example, and eventually it was mandated by the Shah, 1921 Shah onwards, it was ruled at the state level that veils were not allowed for women. Police literally would unveil and descarf women if, against their will, of course, if they were caught outside dressed too modestly. And according to their culture and customs, that's how they would want to dress. But no, 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 no. We need to be Western. Give me that scarf, brava. Not brava. Now, men were encouraged to dress in the Western style, top hat with a brim or whatever you call it. Anyway, doesn't matter. The British backed this Shahdom until about 1953, when power was slipping. Over the years, the power slipped into the hands of the people. There was a bit more of a balance between the Shah and the parliament and the president. So Britain came back in with the Americans, stepped back in to re-establish the Shah, reassert the Shah's power. We can't have our puppet, giving up ground to the people. Ugh, it's nasty stuff. So they came in, probably drank some tea like I'm drinking now, and supported the coup that got rid of Mohammad Mossadegh, which we've already covered. So that's it, guys. Iran in its modern history has basically oscillated, bounced between various degrees of colonial rule, or Western aligned rule, you should say, really, not direct colonialism, but subservience to Western powers, primarily under the Shah, and in some rare cases, like before 1953, as the Shah's power was weakening, and after 1979 to the present day, they've been under native rule with a lot less interference or subservience to Western powers. For better or worse, there's strengths and weaknesses to each time period. People got richer or poorer depending on a very large combination of factors. But the way I've split it is subservience to outside and in service to the people ruled by the people. That's the two sort of ways Iran could be ruled, and they, sort of bounced around to varying extents between these two poles on a sort of sliding scale. Stepping out of line, especially after 1979 and for the half century afterwards to the modern day, that's a century is 100 years, by the way. So for 50 years, from 1979 to about now, Iran had to pay for their freedom and pay dearly. They cannot develop, for example, to this day, their industry. They cannot extract all their resources efficiently. They cannot develop their domestic market or invite companies from the rest of the world to do business in Iran's 90 million people strong market. It is a large market, and they can't do that all because of Western led sanctions. Many will say corruption is a problem as well. Yes, but corruption is an internal problem that many countries deal with. Sanctions are an exceptional, significant pressure on the country, though, that most countries do not deal with, and sanctions are used as a political, economic tool by outside powers. Corruption you deal with in house, but if your house is being bombarded by other pressures from the outside, of course, that's a completely separate topic, right? Sanctions. Many in Iran are not happy with the Ayatollah's power, but many point out that the Shah system was arguably worse. Many, especially younger Iranians, want not the Shah's return, nor the current system. They want change. They want modernization without subservience to the West. Can we please get richer? Can we please get richer and not have religion shoved down our throats? But also, can we not have to lick the Western boot, please? Is there no option where we can't have the best of both? That's what the youth in Iran want, by and large, from what I've seen and the data that I have access to. Right? They want modernization without subservience to the West once more. But the question is that an option? The son of the former Shah, for example, is alive and well, I'm told. He spent most of his life in America. I think at some points he was in France. And he makes it clear that he's a supporter of Israel, right? And he's met Netanyahu at least once. And he's itching to be installed on his throne once more, where he will likely modernize Iran, albeit under the wise overwatch of Israel and Big Daddy USA, right? They will, the Shah intends, the current wannabe Shah, intends to move Iran back into the Western sphere under Western subservience, where he hopes he can make some money for himself and potentially for his people. Maybe he cares about his people. I can't say he does not. He just has a different opinion of how to serve his people. Now, an Israel-approved Iranian administration under a new Shah. Most Iranians would say, hell no, it will be a cold day in hell before I support that kind of governance that is subservient to Israel. I don't think they want the best for the Iranian people. Others may say, nah, actually, maybe we should work under the West, right? We get richer, even if it means we are subservient to another power. The question really boils down to, would you rather be a wealthy slave or an impoverished free man? Blue pill or red pill? That's a Matrix reference. You could go back to sleep knowing that independence was there, but you want to go back to sleep and live a rich life. Blue pill. Or your life's going to be considerably harder, but damn it, you'll be free to make your own decisions at a state level. Red pill. There's no right answer, by the way, just options. And I convey them to you without the Western spin, without demonizing, for example, the current administration, without glorifying them either. There's no doubt shortcomings with the current administration. And now you know about Iran's interesting modern history. It's a fortress of a country with an intelligent and resilient people, and time will tell where destiny takes them. And I'll be here to bring to you the news and the analysis on my main page, NewsBaba, and the history on this page, newsbaba.history, moving forward into the weeks, the months, and hopefully the years ahead of us. I'm Mahfouz, and I'll see you on the next one.